You're Human and You. Written by Mad Max the Black. Chapter 6. Welcome to Ponyville, Part 2. I had been sitting there by myself for a while before sounds of a nearby commotion grabbed my attention. Cracking my eyes open, I glanced around for the source of the sound. Across the street I spied several ponies in golden armor approaching one of the buildings. Knocking on the door, it was answered by a pony with a pale yellow coat and a bouncy mane that was a combination of purple and pink. One of the guards waved a piece of paper in her face before they barged into the house. Several minutes later they emerged again, pulling a mint green unicorn with them. She was shackled and struggling violently. She had a strange sheath-like object over her horn. I couldn't make out what she was yelling, but she was giving them an earful. They gagged her with some cloth before pushing her into a sitting position against the house. One of the guards gave a whistle and a large cart rolled into view, pulled by more guards. I sat up straighter as I got a good look at the cart. It was basically a large cage with wheels.
This just got a little more interesting.
Several ponies seemed to agree with me as a small crowd began to gather in front of the house. The guards formed a perimeter around the front of the house, pushing back the curious ponies. The large cage was opened, and a few of the guards entered the house again. A minute later, one of the guards exited, a human trailing behind him. He led it to the cage before pushing it aside. Another human followed the first, and then another. I started to count each human that emerged from the house.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
They continued to come, one human after another, males and females alike.
23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28.
They started to come in twos and threes. I was beginning to have trouble counting all of them before they were shot into the cage.
38, 43, 45, 49, 54.
The cage was beginning to look cramped, humans pushing against one another as more and more of them were pushed in.
63, 68, 72, 76, 81.
Finally, the waves of humans began to die down, until the guard shoved one last straggler into the cage and slammed the door. That cart cage was packed. Arms and legs stuck out through the cage bars as the humans pushed against one another. I had a final rough count of 98. They had pulled 98 humans out of that one house. The cart rolled off, disappearing around the corner of the street. The guards were now talking to the pony that had opened the door, occasionally pointing to the mint green unicorn still squirming on the ground. The pale yellow pony seemed to be on the verge of tears. The guards continued to talk and the pony began to nod. I was so entranced by the scene before me that I jumped as the door beside me opened and Twilight walked out.
Thanks again, Rarity. I really appreciate this.
Twilight turned to me, a small package held in her magic. She looked a little worn out, a small frown in her face. Approaching me, she slipped the package into her saddlebags, grasping the leash in her magic. Twilight pulled it out of the building. Rarity stuck her head out of the door, glancing at Twilight. Her mane was slightly disheveled now.
Anytime, dear, just please keep that thing as far away from me as possible.
Pulling her head back inside, she slammed the door and flipped the sign in the window from open to closed. Twilight stared at the door for several seconds, shaking her head, before turning and walking away. A quick pull on the leash and I was off behind her.
That didn't go as expected,
she muttered, head hung low.
I didn't know Rarity felt so strongly about humans.
We walked in silence, heading in the opposite direction of the human-filled cart. As we walked, I began to notice the buildings were beginning to be more spaced out. We were leaving the town. The path turned from cobblestone to dirt as we headed towards a nearby forest.
Where are we heading?
We walked a little bit further before a structure appeared in the distance. I almost didn't see it as it practically blended into the surrounding area. It looked like someone had built a small cottage at the top of a small hill. A small creek ran in front of the cottage, murmuring gently. A bridge crossed the creek, connecting one side path to its counterpart on the other side. Bird houses hung from every possible position around the house, as well as bird feeders. Whoever lived here appeared to be an animal lover.
Hopefully that love extends to humans as well.
Twilight stopped just on the other side of the creek. I stood right behind her, waiting.
I hope Fluttershy's home.
Twilight sighed, staring at the cottage.
I need some cheering up after that talk with Rarity.
We proceed to head across the bridge and out to the door. Twilight rapped on the wood with her hoof. A small eep came from the other side, followed by a fluttering sound. With a click, the door swung open slowly and a pony stuck its head out of the door.
Oh, hello, Twilight.
The mare said, her voice barely above a whisper. She opened the door wider and stepped out. Her coat was a lovely yellow color, wings clasped to her side. Her face was partially hidden behind a large, fluffy pink mane.
Oh my god. She's adorable.
Hi, Fluttershy. Do you have a second?
Twilight said, forcing a smile on her face.
Of course. What do you need?
My heart nearly burst when Fluttershy tilted her head to the side.
Could you possibly take a look at my human for me?
Fluttershy glanced over at me quickly before turning back over to Twilight.
I'm not a human expert, but I'd be happy to give him a quick checkup.
She said, a smile on her face. Turning around, she trotted back into her house. Twilight followed, leading me behind her. The interior of the cottage was apparently built for creatures bigger than humans. The ceiling was high, looming several feet above my head. Despite the high ceiling, it was a homely little house where one could live comfortably. There was evidence of animals littered across the floor. A few feathers here, a couple of tufts of fur there. The entire place had a calming air to it. Taking the leash from Twilight, Fluttershy led me over to a small couch and sat me down with a gentle push of her hoof. Opening her wings, she fluttered up and hovered in front of me.
Well, aren't you a nice-looking human?
She crooned, looking at me with her big, cyan eyes. Clasping my head in her hooves, she tilted it first to the left and then to the right, studying my features, humming softly as she worked. Placing a hoof on my chin, she pushed down, forcing my mouth to open. Leaning in slightly, she studied my teeth.
His teeth appear to be in excellent condition. Most humans have yellowing teeth, but his are more of a whitish hue,
she said, leaning back and releasing my jaw. She slowly moved down my body, studying and prodding as she went. When she reached one of my ribs, she paused, frowning slightly. She prodded my side with her hoof, causing me to squirm slightly. She prodded me again and I fought the urge to laugh. I was ticklish, and her soft pokes were hitting the right spots.
He appears to be slightly malnourished,
she finally said, glancing back at Twilight, who perked up. She stood up and walked over to the hovering Pegasus, leaning in to get a better look.
You should barely be able to see his ribs, but as you can see,
Fluttershy said, rubbing a hoof across my exposed ribs.
His ribs are more pronounced.
She continued to rub the hoof across my ribs, a small frown on her face as she continued to study me. The motion was actually nice, and was quite soothing.
He wasn't fed properly.
Turning to Twilight, she let her hoof off my chest.
Where did you get him from? Princess Celestia sent him to me last night. She said that she found him in a group of humans that some traders were taking to the market at Canterlot.
Twilight said, tilting her head slightly.
Why? Whoever was taking care of him wasn't doing it properly. He's clearly been underfed. They weren't giving him the proper amount of food on a daily basis.
Fluttershy took her hoof and grabbed my hand with it. I felt her hoof grip my hand. It reminded me of a suction cup. Lifting my hand up for Twilight to see, she pointed at my wrist with her free hoof. The skin around my wrist were still red, raw from the rope bindings that I had worn for the past 2 weeks.
You can also see where his wrists have been bound. He had ropes around his wrist when he arrived at the library last night, but I removed them before I went to bed.
Twilight stared at my wrist, a strange expression on her face.
It's possible the princess had him bound before she sent him, just to make sure he didn't freak out and attack me.
Fluttershy shook her head, releasing my hand.
No.
She stood staring off in the distance, almost in a trance.
It would have taken longer than that for his wrist to get in that state. His wrist would have been bound for over a week.
Twilight studied Fluttershy with a hard look, sucking lightly on her cheek.
Are you suggesting that the traders the princess ran into were treating their humans poorly?
Twilight finally asked her, her voice calm.
It's possible. Yes.
Fluttershy replied, snapping out of her trance. The two mares were silent for a while, both lost in thought.
I'll write to the princess when I get back home. Hopefully she'll be able to shed some light on the situation.
Twilight finally said. Fluttershy nodded agreement, returning her attention back to me. She continued her examination.
For someone who claims not to be a human expert, she picked up on those signs fairly quickly.
I mused as she worked down my body.
He seems to be rather muscular.
She said, slowly running a hoof over my abs.
He's not the most muscular human I've seen. Those belong to Applejack. He is rather fit, though, considering his malnourished state.
She continued moving down, her hooves dancing across my skin as she worked.
Okay, we're getting a little low there.
Unable to voice my complaints, I was forced to sit there and wait as she moved down to my groin. Spreading my legs with her hoof, she leaned in slightly before gasping and jerking up quickly.
Oh my.
She stammered, her face growing red. Her wings seemed to lock up and she landed on the floor with a soft thump. Twilight looked at the Pegasus curiously, tilting her head to the side.
What's the matter?
Twilight asked, inching closer to the flustered mare.
Fluttershy?
Fluttershy looked at Twilight, her face crimson. She tried in vain to hide behind her mane, clearly embarrassed.
What did you expect when you went looking down there?
Fluttershy squeaked, turning redder, if that was even possible.
He has an impressively sized...
She trailed off at the end. Twilight just looked more confused.
Come on, does she have to paint you a picture?
Fluttershy refused to meet Twilight's eyes, instead watching her hoof as she drew circles on the floor.
Can you repeat that?
Twilight asked, leaning in closer.
His member is larger than most humans.
Fluttershy managed to say, refusing to look up. Twilight's face immediately lit up as well, the wings snapping out.
The wing thing must have something to do with arousal.
I was now sitting there, glancing between two flustered mares, each one unable to look at one another. Twilight was the first to recover. Finally glancing at Fluttershy, she cleared her throat.
Anything else? Nope. He appears to be in good health, except for being slightly underweight and having injuries on his wrists.
Fluttershy gave me a final look over, avoiding my crotch.
I just have to make sure you're keeping him well fed and hydrated, as well as give him plenty of space to wander freely.
Landing, Fluttershy shuffled backwards slightly, picking the end of the leash up in her mouth. Twilight approached, taking the leash in her magic.
Thanks, Fluttershy,
she said, smiling at the timid Pegasus.
I really appreciate your help. You're welcome,
Fluttershy said softly, smiling back.
Just make sure to take good care of him. He's such a lovely-looking human after all.
The pair hugged before Twilight led me out the door. Fluttershy stood in the doorway, waving at us as we walked away. The rest of the afternoon was spent going to various shops across town. At some I was allowed inside, while at others I was forced to wait outside. We stopped by a store that was called Human Smart. I had to resist the urge to smash my head against the building at that. Twilight bought a bed that looked very similar to a large dog bed from back home. Along with the bed, she bought a couple of blankets. She also bought 2 bowls, which I'm assuming were meant for water and food.
There's no way in hell I'm crouching on the floor to drink.
She also bought some toys, much to my horror. They were similar to dog toys back home, except that they weren't themed for dogs. There were balls, some knotted ropes, frisbees, some squeaky toys. I think I died a little inside as she bought them. We hit a few more shops after that, including an astronomy store that made it clear that there were no humans allowed. I was forced to wait outside for nearly an hour as Twilight drooled over the telescopes. It was during these periods when I was left outside by myself that I tried to memorize the town as best I could. If I had ever managed to escape or get away from Twilight, I had wanted a clear escape route. After Twilight finally emerged from the astronomy store, we continued our store hopping, each one as strange as the last. It was at one particular shop, the one that's shaped like a gingerbread house, that I spied a large sign with the words, "Welcome to Ponyville," emblazoned on it with large golden letters.
At least I now have a name to go with this crazy town. Ponyville. Another punny name. Where's the pony name? A punny pony name?
I was still musing over that when Twilight emerged and retrieved me, leading me to the next store. I didn't even taste the food she had bought for me inside. We arrived back at the library just as the sun was going down. Entering the building, I sat down on the floor, rubbing my feet. Twilight latched my leash to the wall, then proceeded to empty her saddlebags. Carrying the objects she just bought to their appropriate places, she hummed to herself. After placing my new bed on the ground near the wall that the leash was attached to, she entered the kitchen. Glancing around lazily, I noticed a small desk in the corner of the room. I perked up as I noticed what was on it.
Scrolls, ink and quills.
I immediately stood up and made for the desk. I had just about reached it when my neck snapped back, the color choking me. Glancing behind me in confusion, I groaned at the sight behind me. I had reached the end of my leash. Grabbing it, I pulled it taut, trying to get a couple more inches out of the wall, but to no avail. Turning back to the desk, I reached an arm out, grasping for the material. It was just out of my reach. Straining, I tried harder and harder to reach my intended target. My fingertips had just brushed against the scroll when a shout behind me startled me. Something tugged on my leash, causing me to fall backwards on my ass. Looking around, I was confronted by an angry Twilight.
No, those are not yours,
She said sternly, walking to the desk. She wrapped one of the scrolls in her magic, smacking me on the back of the head with it. She gathered up the rest of the clutter covering her desk, quickly storing the materials in the shelves above it, well out of my reach. She continued to glare at me as if I had just insulted her in some way. Turning towards me, she pulled out the toys she had bought at the human store and waved them in my face.
These are yours. You can play with these.
She threw one ball at me, putting a little more force behind it than was necessary. It bounced off my head, falling to the floor in between my legs. Tossing the rest of the toys into the ground, she walked over to where the leash met the wall, and Twilight proceeded to shorten the length of the leash before turning off the lights and heading up the stairs.
Now, you stay down here and behave. I have a letter to write.
With that, she disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the dark. I sat there, glaring up at where the mare had disappeared to. She had just crossed the line. I had been in this goddamn place for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks I had been treated like shit, forced into a small cage for too long, barely fed, and forced to watch as other humans were neutered and branded, with the knowledge that there was nothing I could do if they decided that it was my turn. What's more is the fact that every attempt I had tried at communicating with the ponies had been thwarted by them, albeit the attempts weren't many. For 2 weeks I had to deal with this bullshit, and I had enough.
Fine. If they want to treat me like an animal, then I'm gonna start acting like one.
A sudden pressure in my lower stomach made me realize something. I hadn't had the chance to go to the bathroom yet. From what I saw today, most humans did their business outside. With Twilight now resigning herself for the room for the night, I doubted that she would be letting me out anytime soon. Unable to reach the bathroom or a nearby window, I left only one option. I wasn't happy about it, but I've seen my dog do it several times, and if I was going to act like an animal, I might as well do it. The urge growing, I looked around the dark room, spotting my prey just within reach. I smiled and just set it upon the poor rug. This should wake her up in the morning. Thank you to my Patreons, Chase Lemaster, Jason, Squall, Windfeather, Lunar Gaze, 8th Day of Night, Starlight Blaze, Hyperlink, Nightingale, Rainflicker, Redeemer of Dark, and Dreamless Portal. My tier 2s Captain Blueshadow, The Animated Ghost, HKH4, aka Texture, Sword Brother Mordred, Danish Dash, Nocturne, DJMX 2000, Papa Lennon, and Can Panzer. And of course a large thank you to my Titan tiers, Dark Guardian, Maverick, and Silent Titan. I appreciate you guys' support so much and it means a ton to me. That aside, however, this has been Firehearth. Have a wonderful day.